Chow Yufeng was the head of a large company. One evening at a corporate party, Yufeng had a seizure, which turned out to be fatal for him. When he woke up, he was in 1983, when he was 22 years old and still married to Jiang Xiaodo. After getting dressed, he went into the next room, where a very upset Xiaodo was sitting. After that, someone knocked on the door of the apartment. It turned out to be his younger brother Zheng and his younger sister Yuna, who had a very large bruise on her face, which was made by Huan, a friend of Yufeng's parents and the director of the factory where Yufeng's parents worked. Yufeng was very worried about her sister's condition, but she didn't point it out. As it turned out later, Yuna did not have money and food, and he asks Yufeng for them. Yufeng and Xiaodo had only 5 yuan, 10 kilograms of rice and 2 kilograms of flour. Yufeng asks Xiaodo to give Yun the money and rice, promising that he will make more money soon. Xiaodo agrees and Yufeng gives all the money and rice to Yuna. After that, Yufeng goes to Huang to demand compensation from him for the death of his parents at work. When Yufeng reached Huang's apartment, he began to ask him for compensation for the deaths of his parents, since Yufeng was now having some financial difficulties. Yufeng began to threaten Huang with a riot, for he would have nothing to lose because of the possibility of starving to death. Huan explained to Yufeng that if he started a riot, he would be stopped very quickly by the guards or the police. Yufeng continued to threaten Huang, saying that he didn't care about the possibility of being arrested. Huan said that he was very sorry for his parents, and that he would pay him 500 yuan instead of the 600 yuan due to his superiors, since Huan also had money problems. A few minutes later, Huan gave Yufeng the money, but the thought that Huan would still pay for the death of his parents did not leave him. Later, he sees a candy vendor on the street, and Yufeng decides to buy one candy and give it to Xiaodo on his birthday. Yufeng, once at home, gives Xiaodo candy, to which she was very surprised and very happy. After that, Yufeng and Xiaodo went to bed. The next day, Yufeng wakes up to the early crowing of a rooster outside the window. A few minutes later, Xiaodo wakes up and sees 2 servings of shoumian that Yufeng had prepared on the kitchen table. Xiaodo was worried that Yufeng stole the breakfast eggs, but he reassured her that he borrowed them from Auntie Wang, who lived next door. Later, she notices a large pile of money, and she was very surprised that he had that kind of money. Yufeng explained to Xiaodo that this was compensation for the death of his parents. This surprised Xiaodo a little, since the plant officially stated that the parents themselves were responsible for their death, and that the plant still gave money for their death. Yufeng said that Huan gave him the money out of fear that Yufeng would riot at the factory. Yufeng was going to look for evidence of Huan's guilt in the death of his parents, thinking that he would not be able to hide all the evidence. Yufeng then offered to split the money between himself, Xiaodo, and Yuna. After breakfast, he decides to go to Yuna's to give her some of the money. On the way, he met Auntie Wang, who was trying to figure out where her chicken eggs had gone. Yufeng told her that he was the one who borrowed the eggs, which made her very angry. Yufeng then gives her 2 yuan as an apology, which immediately made her angry. Along the way, he also met his friend Nike Lu, who told Yufeng that tonight they would be playing against Chen Gota himself, the son of a former steel plant director who now works there. Nike asks Yufeng to play the game at his house, but he offers to play at Nike's house, which Nike was not happy about. Once outside Yuna's house, he notices that the door was open. Going inside, he is met by Zheng. Also at home was Yuyue, another younger sister of Yufeng, who cooked noodles for everyone for dinner. Yufeng decides to help her sister with lunch. After a while, Yuna comes home, surprised by her older brother's visit. While Yufeng was preparing dinner, Yuna noticed that he was not saving flour at all, to which Yufeng said that he had money. Yuna was dissatisfied with her brother's behavior, thinking that he had gone back to gambling, selling his belongings, and other such things. Yufeng did not say where he got the money from, and he simply gave part of his money to Yuna under the pretext that she needed to buy a lot of food, since Yuna had exams on her nose. This action only made Yuna more worried, who was still trying to figure out where Yufeng got the money from. He said that he would explain at the table, and during dinner, he tells the sisters that he took the money from Huang, which greatly surprised them. Yufeng explained that it was Huan who was responsible for the death of his parents, as he knew that his new equipment was malfunctioning. He did not want to check the state of the equipment, and so Yufeng was determined to find evidence of his involvement in the death of his parents. Yufeng was going to find the documents needed to purchase new equipment, and then find a seller, and then Huan would not be able to deny his guilt. After this statement, he gave Zheng some money for candy and wished Yun good luck in the upcoming exams, after which he left their house. On the way, he decides to buy ice cream for Tu Fin, and while he was eating, he met several people on the street, among whom was Shen Zizhen, Xiaodo's girlfriend and wife of Xiao Shan, Huan's son. Xiao Shan sharply lashed out at Yufeng, claiming he was behaving inappropriately. Yufeng said that he would not act like a bully, especially in front of Xiaodo's friends. Shen reassured Xiao Shan by telling him that they were just in the same class before. The friends walked on, and Yufeng only looked after them, thinking that Xiao Shan did not have long to live. After this incident, he decides to go to the store and buy some food, and after that he goes home with 2 full bags of groceries. On the way, he sees Xiaodo, who also recently ate ice cream and is also walking home with a large watermelon. Yufeng saw how embarrassed Xiaodo was, and he began to calm her down, telling her that they now had enough money to buy whatever they wanted. After that, he decides to help Xiaodo carry the watermelon and they walk home together. During the night of the same day, someone started knocking hard on the door while waiting for Yufeng. It was Nike, and he started telling Yufeng that he had lost some money in the morning and that his wife started yelling at him for wasting all his money on gambling. Nike proposes to Yufeng the idea of hooking Rich Chen into the casino, and if they both put in the effort, they will be able to snatch a large sum from him. But first, he wanted to borrow some money from Yufeng since he didn't have any money right now. Yufeng reminded Nike that he still owed him 3 yuan and that he only had 1 yuan with him. Nike was very surprised that he came to play for 1 yuan. Yufeng, in turn, reminded Nike that he came to play with no money at all. At first, Yufeng invites Nike to play another time, but Nike persuades Yufeng to play the game by offering to lend some money to a friend, after which he removes several crumpled bills from his shoes. After some time, Chen met Yufeng and Nike. After they went to one building, where they will play. Chen told the children how he was carrying fruits for his grandfather today, and that tomorrow he will go again to carry them. When everyone was ready to play, Nike said that Chen had a new game. Chen explained the rules in Do Diju, or Fighting the Landowner, a Chinese fool-like game of chance with poker elements, where the peasants try to beat the landowner with various combinations. The game has begun. Chen becomes a landowner since he had the highest bid, and Yufeng and Nike become peasants. In one game, Chen had a pair of 7s, Yufeng had a pair of 8s, and Nike folded a pair of 10s, causing Chen to win. In the next game, Chen had a pair of 6s, Yufeng had a pair of kings, and Nike had a pair of aces, which now causes Nike to become a landowner while Chen becomes a peasant. In the next game, Nike had nothing to move, and then Chen laid out his jack. Meanwhile, Yufeng says that he has bad cards, but in reality he had a deuce bomb. Then Nike throws a bomb of 6s on the table, and only after that Yufeng throws a bomb of 2s, which meant that he won and was entitled to 4 yuan for each bomb. In the last game, Yufeng and Nike fold and Chen wins again, which makes Nike very angry. Yufeng also reminded Nike that he now owes Chen 100 yuan, but Nike does not lose hope and hopes that he can still recoup. Yufeng reminds Nike that he now has no money at all to play further. Nike is very angry at the way Yufeng talks to him. Yufeng directly tells Nike that she will talk to him the way he wants to, and that if he has no more money, then he can go from here. He also warns Nike that if he continues to pester Xiaodo, he will regret it very much. After that, he thanks Chen for playing and tells him that he will treat Chen tomorrow at his own expense, after which Yufeng went home. On the way home, Yu Feng thought that Chen Gouda was the son of a former factory manager, and that if he gained his family's trust, it would make it much easier for him to find evidence, since his father was a very influential person who had many useful connections. In the morning, Yu Feng was already at home, and he immediately lay down in his bed, thinking to himself how Nike plans to live without money, after which he immediately fell asleep. The next day, Yu Feng went to a local tea shop, where they poured him fresh hot tea for 5 fun. A little later, the owner of the shop decided to ask Yu Feng how Lu's eldest son is now living, to which he replied that he simply quit. As Yu Feng drank tea, he thought that many Chinese millionaires became successful in the difficult 80s for China, and that trying to return to 2020 now is very stupid when he can take advantage of this and become rich and successful now, in 1983. However, in the same second, he remembered that in 2020 he already had a luxurious career, which was given to him by his overwork. Then he decides that he will return right after he proves Huan's guilt in the death of his parents. From the window of the tea shop, Yu Feng spotted Chen, who had just finished carrying fruit to his grandfather. Yu Feng decides to take the opportunity to greet Chen. Yu Feng then invites Chen to have lunch together, as he promised to treat Chen yesterday. Chen does not want to embarrass Yu Feng, but Yu Feng himself insists on having a meal together. Chen accepts Yu Feng's invitation, and they both go to one of the city's restaurants. After reviewing the menu, Yu Feng began to regret his offer, but he pretended to Chen that he did not mind the money for lunch. Chen was surprised that Yu Feng had some disagreements with Xiao Shan. Yu Feng told Chen that they studied together and often quarreled with each other. Later, Chen told Yu Feng that he succumbed to him very often, and he wondered why Yu Feng did this. Instead of an answer from Yu Feng, a counter-question followed, in which he wanted to know about his attitude towards Huan, since Yu Feng thought that Chen became somewhat dissatisfied after the answer. Yu Feng thought that this Su was the son of the director of the Linshu steel plant, but Chen said that he was an ordinary guy with good relations with foreign suppliers. Chen then told the story of how a friend of his made over $100,000 making electrical appliances in Shanghai and how he became very successful a little later. After that, Yu Feng reminded Chen that the factory would soon start paying additional fees for heat stroke warning. And then he offered Chen to supply the fruits collected by his family to the factory workers, receiving impressive money for this. Chen refused such an undertaking, because if he did so, then he would be in big financial trouble from his grandfather. And then Yu Feng says that if he becomes an intermediary in such supplies, who also delivers fruits, then no one will know anything. Chen understood Yu Feng's plan and then he agreed to such a scheme to earn money. After that, Yu Feng decides to see Chen off, as after having a lot of alcohol in him, he was not in the best condition to go home on his own. After Yu Feng gave Chen a ride on the motorcycle, he returned home very late, assuming that Xiaodo was already asleep. However, as soon as he returned home, Xiaodo was waiting for him. Yu Feng began to apologize to Xiaodo for returning so late. Then she remembered how on that day Shen Zizhen was talking about how, during her coma, her own Aunt Jiang would not stop mumbling about Xiaodo. Then she said that he had changed a lot for the better, which Shen Zizhen did not believe, thinking that she was protecting him once again. Yu Feng noticed that something was wrong with Xiaodo. She then embraced Yu Feng in tears, telling him that he could do whatever he wanted with her today. From not understanding everything that was happening, Yu Feng was very confused. A little later, when Xiaodo calmed down and came to her senses, Yu Feng told her that he was not feeling well and that he needed to take a little walk now, and he told Xiaodo to go to bed without him tonight. After that, he went to the bathroom to remind himself of what he was here for, and that he should not do anything extra. The next morning, Yu Feng was going to go to Chen to help him carry out his plan of yesterday. He left the house and said goodbye to Xiaodo. When Yu Feng left, she decided to call her father, hoping that she would feel a little better. When Xiaodo called her father, she said that she was fine and that she missed him and her mother very much. Xiaodo's father, suspecting something was wrong, told her not to go anywhere and wait for him and her mother, after which they would take her home. Meanwhile, Yufeng was already at Chen's. There, Chen told Yufeng that he had told his father about their plan, who not only was not indignant, but even agreed with such a plan. Chen also told Yufeng that if the plan worked, he would pay him an extra fee. When Yufeng finished helping Chen in his garden, he headed home. On the way, he was met by Aunt Wan, who informed Yufeng that his relatives had come to visit him, which surprised him greatly. Upon arriving home, Xiaodo's mother and father were waiting for him. Yufeng greeted the guests, but as soon as he approached his father, he swung hard and hit Yufeng in the face for hitting and insulting Xiaodo before. Xiaodo's father was about to strike again, but Xiaodo stopped him and ran to Yufeng to check if he was okay. Yufeng reassured Xiaodo, telling her that her father was doing everything right and that he deserved it all, calling himself the biggest disappointment in her life, after which he apologized for his actions to Xiaodo. However, this only made Father Xiaodo even more angry. After some time, Xiaodo's mother turned to Yufeng to spare her daughter. Yufeng asked Xiaodo what she thought about this and what they should do. After some thought, Xiaodo firmly and hesitantly tells Yufeng that they need to get a divorce. On the evening of the same day, Yufeng and Xiaodo went to the government office, where they were given a divorce certificate. After leaving the building, Xiaodo tells her mother that she wants to have a final talk with Yufeng. Moving away from her parents, Xiaodo decides to give Yufeng the money he gave her. However, he refuses them and tells Xiaodo that he has hurt her too much in the past and he cannot take anything from her. He also told her that if he again takes up the old, then she will have to break any ties with him. After that, Xiaodo walked towards her parents in tears. The next day, Chen comes to Yufeng with the news that the factory will pay for their fruit instead of paying for the heat warning, and by doing so, the factory will pay them 1,500 yuan at a time. Yufeng is happy about this news, but the factory will not accept the goods without packaging, and then he tells Chen that they need to purchase fruit bags. Yufeng and Chen then decide to go to a plastics factory to purchase a batch of plastic bags. Along the way, Yufeng decided to ask Chen if he had any acquaintances there, since the factory would not cooperate with small businesses. Chen, in turn, expected that Yufeng had acquaintances there, which somewhat complicated their task. When Yufeng and Chen arrived at the factory, one of the guards stopped them to find out who they were and why they had come to the factory. Yufeng only asked the guard to call the factory manager for him, since they had a very serious matter with him. The guard then explains to Yufeng and Chen where they can meet the factory manager, after which they continue on their way. On the way to the boss, Yufeng tells Chen that he will speak to the boss himself, and that Chen should remain silent during the conversation. Once Yufeng and Chen were in the factory manager's office, Yufeng greeted him and introduced himself as the director of a fruit export company. Yufeng said that he was walking past the factory towards Shanghai to get a new batch of plastic bags, and that the factory manager also had good bags. However, the chief said that their packages were not suitable for fruit export. Yufeng continued to persuade the head of the plant, holding out a cigarette in the direction of the head of the plant and telling him that on the way to Longshui for a new batch of fruit, he ran out of packaging bags, as they did not calculate some costs. Yufeng assured the factory manager that nothing was more important to the business than guaranteeing the quality of the product. Suddenly, Yufeng tells the boss that he would not mind tasting tea with him, which the boss completely forgot about and pours the guests a mug of purchased tea from the store. While the boss was putting the kettle on, Yufeng told him that they now have a very large order and that they need to receive a ton of packages from the factory within 2 weeks, which greatly impressed the boss. The boss said that if his employees work overtime, they will have time to complete this order within the allotted time. After that, Yufeng wants to inspect the packages in the warehouse to check their quality, and he, Chen, and the boss head to the warehouse. After looking around the warehouse and taking a small batch of packages, Yufeng told the boss that a person would come to them tomorrow and report to the boss about the result of the check. Before Yufeng and Chen leave the factory with a batch of packages, the boss suggests that they all go to a restaurant together and discuss further cooperation, to which Yufeng refuses and suggests discussing everything next time. Chen was delighted with what happened, as they had not spent anything and received a bunch of sacks. Yufeng tells Chen to call the factory manager tomorrow and tell him that the packages have not passed quality control and that their deal will not go through. The next day, as Chen is packing the fruit, Yufeng reminds him that he promised to take him to a city restaurant. At the same time, Yufeng thought that he needed Nike's help for his plan. Before Yufeng and Chen go to a restaurant, Yufeng suggests that Chen ask Nike for help. Such an offer surprised Chen somewhat, especially considering how Nick cheated during the last game together. Yufeng then suggests that they just call Nike. As a result, Chen still called Nike with an offer to help them, to which he agrees, and then the three of them go to the city restaurant, where Nike non-stop ate everything that the waiter brought to the table. After a hearty dinner at a restaurant, Chen went home while Nike tried to find out from Yufeng what exactly they had come up with, to which Yufeng replies that they don't do anything special. However, Nike says that he heard Yufeng and Chen discuss Nike's involvement in their plan while eating. Nike also cites as an argument the fact that they have been friends for a very long time, while he has only known Chen for a few days. Then Yufeng still tells Nike about her and Chen's plan. Nike was shocked that Yufeng would earn 200 yuan after fruit delivery tomorrow. He also decided to remind Yufeng that during that game, Chen forced Nike to cheat, and that Yufeng himself should be careful not to be fooled. Afterwards, Yufeng sarcastically thanks Nick and offers him 50 yuan for help with fruit tomorrow, to which Nike agrees without any hesitation. After the conversation, Nike offers to take some rest at his house, to which Yufeng agrees. Once at Nike's house, Yufeng was surprised by such a house, and he decided to ask Nike if he bought it or paid rent for it, to which Nike replies that he rents it, since he does not have enough money to buy it. Then Yufeng remembered that Nike was the only locksmith in the area, and that he could get a good demand from it, since he had no competitors. Nike, on the other hand, says that he gave it up a long time ago after the neighbors reported him to the police for trying to open one of the locks. Yufeng then thought it was good that Nike could pick locks, and he asked him to show him how he did it. Nike shows Yufeng how he picks an old lock with a special tool. Yufeng was greatly surprised at how easily he was able to pick the lock, and then he asks Nike to teach him how to do the same. Nike refused Yufeng on the pretext that it was illegal and that he didn't want to set his friend up. Then Yufeng offers to pay 100 yuan instead of 50 for tomorrow's help with fruit, and then Nike agrees to teach Yufeng how to pick locks. The next morning, Yufeng and Nike were at the steel plant, and Chen also arrives a little later. He was at a loss as to what Nike was doing at the factory, and then Yufeng explained to him that the two of them would help him. As he prepared to go to work, Yufeng thought that he should not be allowed to carry out the plan too soon, since the relationship between Huan and Su Changjiang is now too strained, and he was sure that various supplier scams were going on there. Meanwhile, Chen noticed that Yufeng was wearing a farmer's hat, to which he replied that he was a farmer and that he was trying to match the image, which he really liked. Chen then points out to Yufeng where the fruit is. Closer to dinner, Yufeng and Nike were still dragging fruit from the warehouse. At one point, Yufeng pretended that he suddenly became ill, and that he urgently needed to leave for the restroom, while leaving Nike to carry bags of fruit alone. However, in fact, Yufeng was heading to Huang's office while everyone was at lunch to get all the necessary documents from there, but as soon as he reached the office, the door was locked. But despite this, Yufeng decided to use his new lock-picking skills, and after a successful opening, he ended up in the office. After Yufeng was in the office, he decides to find documents for the purchase of new equipment among the countless contracts, and he finds such a document, but it did not have any seal or signatures from the seller and recipient. Then he began to think about where the signed treaty might be. Later, Yufeng notices a shelf of various classical novels in his office, and Yufeng had the idea that Huan would not just put books of classical Chinese literature in his office just like that. Thinking about this, Yufeng decides to take and check one of these books, but it turned out to be too heavy for such a book, causing it to fall to the floor with a loud sound. As it turned out a little later, it was not a book, but a box with documents. Several papers fell out of it, among which Yufeng finds one of the documents he needs. When Yufeng found the necessary documents, he returned to the angry Nike, who had already managed to drag almost all the fruits during Yufeng's absence. Yufeng simply gives Nike the promised amount of money and leaves the factory while Nike takes care of the rest of the fruit. Yufeng was heading home and thought that according to the document he stole, the plant manager had sealed it and received 2.5 million yuan for it, thinking that only a madman could do that. While Yufeng was walking down the street, he saw a group of Xiaodo's friends who called Ziyu, one of Xiaodo's friends. While they were yelling at her, she noticed Yufeng behind them, and everyone turned their attention to him, including Xiao Shan, who was surprised at how easily he was walking down the street. Xiao Shan started trying to hurt Yufeng in every possible way, talking sarcastically about how good life is for divorced people and saying that Xiaodo should have left Yufeng a long time ago. One of the girls only added that she felt sorry for Xiaodo, since it is very difficult for a girl who has already been married before to get married again. Yufeng only greeted Suyu, ignoring other people's provocations, which only angered Xiao Shan more. He then simply grabbed Yufeng, making the others focus on what Yufeng was wearing. Then Yufeng cannot bear such behavior and attacks Xiao Shan, holding his twisted hand. Xiao Shan began to ask to be let go, after which his friends began to demand to let him go. After that, Yufeng releases Xiao Shan, pushing him towards the girl who tried to hurt Yufeng with him. After that, Yufeng demanded that Xiao Shan tell him all this to his face if he was not a coward. Xiao Shan only shouted viciously at Yufeng, while he angered Xiao Shan even more by saying various childish names in response. Then Xiao Shan said that Yufeng became very bold after his father gave him money. Yufeng said that his father didn't have long to live. Then he asked Xiao Shan if his father changed anything after April, talking about Huan's strained relationship with his son, thus he was able to hurt Xiao Shan to the quick. Xiao Shan calmly and without aggression said that there had been no changes since then. After that, Yufeng approached Suyu to ask her if she could call him. They then entered Suyu's home, and Yufeng asked her to dial the Xian and hardware factory number that was listed on the documents. Suyu dialed the number, and after a few rings, someone picked up the phone and answered the call. Then she hands the phone to Yufeng, and he asks Qin Baoma to answer the phone. During the call, Yufeng introduced himself as the director of the Lingshui factory. Yufeng said that he was calling from a new phone, since previous calls were made from a different number. After all these clarifications, Yufeng says into the phone that the goods that the factory received between April and June did not pass the quality control. He also added that there had been an accident at the plant and that they would take responsibility for that incident. Ma Qingbao was perplexed by what he heard, because according to him, Huan called him at that time and said that all the equipment was working properly and that they did not need additional spare parts and tools. Then Yufeng said that in the document he received, the name of the director of the equipment factory was indicated in the column responsible for the equipment. Then the director of the factory demanded to call the manager of the factory, Kang Jinzhong. Yufeng, on the other hand, said that he was now at the admissions office, and that the director himself could call him. From the receiver of the phone, beeps went off, from which Yufeng realized that Ma Qingbao was now trying to get through to the manager. Meanwhile, Kang Jinzhong picks up the work phone, from which the voice of Ma Qingbao was heard, who claimed that he did not have any contracts with Huan. The manager did not understand what the director meant, and he repeated that their factory did not make any arrangements with the factory for any contracts during the period from May to June. The manager wanted to know that Huan had not entered into any contract with the factory for 3 months. The director of the factory said that there were no contracts, and that one of the employees of the factory reported this to him, who also said that the factory would be held responsible. The plant manager realized that someone had called the factory director from a non-working number of the plant, which led to the conclusion that this someone knew everything and had all the necessary evidence with him. The manager of the plant recalled that it was from April to June that the plant had the highest sales, earning more than 3 million yuan during this time. He also recalled that immediately after the delivery of new equipment at the plant, an accident occurred in which a married couple died. Immediately after that, the manager grabbed the phone, called Mr. Yu, and demanded that the factory immediately stop all the equipment in the second department. He also asked not to talk about Huang's emergency stop. After that, Yufeng called Kang Jinzhong, the plant manager. Yufeng told him that he had Huan's evidence, which included a fake contract with a hardware factory that gave Huan more than 3 million yuan. He also said that Huan made a contract with the Seat company, from which he purchased the same parts. The director was shocked by what he heard, and he wanted to make sure that there was all the necessary evidence in this case, and he immediately decides to go to Yufeng. Yufeng also advised the director to contact the police so that he would not be punished during the proceedings, after which the telephone conversation was ended. The director was surprised that such a young yet smart person like Yufeng had called. Yufeng, meanwhile, was thinking that if he hadn't told the headmaster to go to the police, sooner or later he too would have suffered a heavy punishment. Suyu only looked at all this and understood that Yufeng was talking to the plant manager about something very important. After the call, the director asks one of the workers to lend him his car, and after that he went to Yufeng. A few minutes later, the factory manager was already at Suyu's house, and Yufeng opened the door for him. When the director saw Yufeng, he saw him as the son of one of the workers who died at his factory. The director and Yufeng greeted each other, and Yufeng presented all the documents to the director. He looked at all these documents and realized that they would be more than enough to prove Huang's guilt. The director said that Yufeng had done a heroic deed, to which Yufeng said that the director had done all the work himself. After that, several policemen immediately appeared behind the director's back, who ran after the director right from the factory. The headmaster thought that Yufeng had decided to arrange things right away in order to protect him from any responsibility. After that, the director immediately provided the police with all the agreements and contracts. He said that he had found all these documents himself in Huang's office, and that this was direct evidence of Huang's fraudulent schemes for personal gain. He also said that because of Huan, 2 people died at the factory, and he began to tell all about the incident. Afterwards, the director entrusted Yufeng with telling the police about his parents' deaths. After a while, Yufeng told all the details of that incident, and the headmaster confirmed all of Yufeng's words. After the story, the officer wanted to ask Yufeng if Huan knew that his fraud had been exposed. Yufeng said that Huan did not know that he had been exposed. Yufeng also told the officer that now Huan could either be at his home or at the factory in his office. He also added that it would be easy to catch him through his relatives. The officer was shocked that Yufeng realized that he wanted to arrest Huan. After that, the officer informed the director that he would immediately send a detachment to Huan. He also asked the director to go through the director with him, which the director did. At this moment, Huan pours himself some tea in his office. Looking closer, he notices that the fake books of Chinese novels are not arranged in the order they were before. He decides to check one of the fake books for fake contracts, but they are not there, which scared him very much. Huan recalls that recently a farmer who did not look like an ordinary factory worker came to work at their factory. He tries to remember where he could have seen this farmer's face before, and he realizes that this farmer was Yufeng. Meanwhile, Yufeng decides to visit her sisters and brother. When he entered, Jing met him. Going into the living room, he meets Yuna with his classmates Chang and Nian, who were preparing for the exams together, and a little later, Yufeng greets Yuyue. Yufeng said that he was passing by and decided to visit people close to him. Afterwards, he decides to turn to Yuna to give her some words. Then Chang and Nian started to get ready to leave. They said goodbye to everyone and went home. At the same time, Nian begins to worry about the fact that Yufeng has come back to sell something from the house. A little later, Yufeng gathered everyone and informed them that he had finally dealt with Huan and told them not to worry about him anymore. After that, a very angry and enraged Huan stood at the entrance to the house, who was ready to tear Yufeng into small pieces. Looking at Yufeng, Huan realized that it was Yu Feng who had reported him to the manager, the director, and the police. He immediately lashed out at Yu Feng, demanding that he return everything he had. However, Yu Feng manages to dodge Huan, grab his arm and begin to roll it up to hold him back. Yu Feng began to put pressure on Huang's conscience in every possible way, reminding him of the fake contracts with the equipment factory. Huan thought that he had all the documents, and he demanded that Yu Feng return them to him immediately. Yu Feng continued to press Huan's conscience, reminding him of all these fake contracts and the death of Yu Feng's parent, while not forgetting to twist Huan's hand even more, which only made Huan's pain worse. After that, Yu Feng let go of Huan's hand and pinned him to the floor face down. He also took an empty glass bottle from the table and broke it, which greatly frightened the Yu Feng sisters. After breaking the bottle, he brought the broken neck of the bottle to Huang's neck so that he finally understood the seriousness of the situation that was happening to him. Huan was very frightened by Yu Feng's behavior and said that he understood the seriousness of the things that were happening to him now. Yu Feng, in a fit of rage, could not resist and with all his strength hit Huang in the face so hard that for a moment it seemed that he had simply lost consciousness. However, Huan was conscious and was even able to continue talking about how he understood that he was in a hopeless situation for himself, while trying to figure out exactly what Yu Feng needed from him. Yu Feng said that he made this blow as revenge on Huang for the death of his parents. Yu Feng was already ready to make another blow, and with him Yuna also wanted to hit Huan in the face with all her might, but Yu Yue tried with all her might to restrain her outbursts of anger, realizing that this would not change the situation in any way. Huan tried to apologize to Yu Feng in every possible way, telling him that he had nothing to do with the death of his parents, writing it all off as an accident, and telling him that he really felt sorry for his parents and that he was sorry for his loss. Yu Feng sarcastically echoed Huan, not believing a single word he said. Huan, not understanding all of Yu Feng's sarcasm, began to demand that he return all the documents to him, saying that they are state property, and that if someone else finds out that Yu Feng has all the contracts, then sooner or later he will be arrested. Yu Feng then agreed with everything Huang had said and he told him that he should go with Yu Feng so that he could hand over all the documents to Huang in person. After that, they began to leave the house together. The Yu Feng sisters were surprised at such a sudden change in their brother's behavior, but before leaving their house, he looked in their direction and let them know that things would not end so easily between him and Huan. While Yu Feng and Hun were walking down the street, Yu Feng decided to ask Huang how they would decide together on the issue of dividing the money between themselves. Huan began to pretend that he had no money at all, since he gave all his last money to Yu Feng as compensation for the death of his parents, which the factory itself refused to compensate. Knowing the whole truth, Yu Feng punched Huang in the face, threatening him that if he did not tell him the truth, he would hand over all the documents to the higher authorities of the factory. Huan then realized that Yu Feng already knew everything. Yu Feng then demanded that Huang stop all these pretense, reassuring Huan with the fact that Yu Feng did not want to take Huang's money, which surprised him greatly. Then Huan decides to find out why Yu Feng arranged all this, to which he replied that he is on Huan's side, and that he is not going to leave Huan, otherwise he also risks getting into such trouble with Huan. Yu Feng also asked Huang that the next time he buys equipment for the factory, he will have to replace all the previous equipment with higher quality, and in this case, no one will have unnecessary questions. Huan agreed with Yu Feng's statement, after which they continued on their way together. After some time, Yu Feng and Huan reached a cemetery, where Huan hid 100,000 yuan, which he saved for emergencies. He dug up the money and handed it over to Yu Feng on the condition that he would not forget their agreement. After that, Yu Feng and Huan continued to move on to the documents. On the way, Yu Feng decides to stop by the nearest clothing store to buy some new and clean clothes for Huan, because after everything that happened to him, his clothes were badly damaged, which could cause unnecessary questions from others. After Huan changed into clean clothes, he finally dares to ask Yu Feng where the documents are, to which Yu Feng replies that all the documents are now under the red brick near the trash can near Huan's house. Huan was shocked at how Yu Feng could think of hiding such important documents in such a place. Huan immediately began to rush Yufeng to confirm his words. After a while, both of them were near Huang's house, but when they reached the main entrance, Mr. Yu was standing next to the gate, who had been impatiently waiting for Huang's arrival for a very long time. When Huan was close by, Yu ordered the police to arrest him, after which 2 policemen grabbed him. Then Huan began to blame Yufeng for everything that was happening, which he, in turn, looked at with extreme pleasure, and his happiness simply knew no bounds. Looking at Yufeng's face, Huan realized that this was all set up beforehand. He also remembered that on the way home, Yufeng told him to wash his hands, so that later no one could understand that before that he dug up Yufeng. And then, at one point, he realized that he would not be able to take Yufeng with him to prison. After his thoughts, Huan began to shout at the police to let him go immediately, but while he was shouting, he managed to lose consciousness and fall to the ground. Meanwhile, Yufeng decides to leave the place of detention so as not to arouse unnecessary suspicion. In the evening of the same day, Yufeng again went home to his sisters and brother. Gathering together at the dining table in the living room, Yufeng tells them that tomorrow everyone will know about Huang's detention. After this news, Yufeng told the girls that he was about to show them something and asked them to restrain their emotions. The sisters at first did not understand what exactly they were talking about. After that, Yufeng takes out a bag of dug-up money and dumps all the money right on the table. The girls could not help screaming at what they saw, and then Yufeng asks them to be quiet and not attract too much attention. Yuna immediately began trying to ask Yufeng where he got so much money from. Yufeng said that this was the money that their parents had to sacrifice for. After that, Yufeng tells the whole story in detail, from the moment Huan gave him 600 yuan in compensation to the moment Huang was detained by the police. After the story, Yufeng says that he will give all the money to Yuna for further safekeeping, and asked Yuna that if someone wants to buy something very expensive, then they should discuss all such matters among themselves in advance. He also asked the girls that if he again takes up the old ways and he again asks them for money, then they should not give him anything. The girls did not fully understand what exactly Yufeng meant. After that, he is already going to leave, while asking the girls to hide all the money well. Before Yufeng leaves, Yuna tells him that it's already dark outside, and she invites him to stay for dinner. Yufeng refuses such an offer, justifying it by the fact that he has some more urgent business. He also said that thanks to this money, they will never have any problems with food. Before leaving the house, Yufeng asks Yuna to call him brother again. Such a request slightly embarrassed her, and then she remembered those moments in her life when, after the death of her parents, Yufeng came to them drunk every day to once again sell something from their house so that he could continue to drink. Yufeng decides not to linger at the sisters' house, and then he says goodbye to the sisters and leaves. On the way home, he decides to buy a couple of bottles of rice wine from the local store, gleefully thinking that he might not have made it before closing time. After returning home, Yufeng makes himself comfortable on the couch and starts drinking the rice wine he bought on the way home. Once in one of the stages of intoxication, he begins to imagine Xiaodo, which he missed. At the same time, he silently says goodbye to his sisters and brother, hoping that tomorrow he will return back to 2020. Yufeng did not stop drinking and at one point fell asleep, and in his dream he saw distorted images of the moment when, in his time, when he was a rich and successful businessman, he was seized by a heart attack and the moment of his own funeral, which was attended by a very large number of people, who wanted to honor his memory. The next day, instead of being in his own time, he was still in 1983 and was sleeping drunk on the couch. Yufeng woke up extremely disappointed by the fact that even after paying off Huan, he could not go back to his own time, not understanding why he still stayed here. After a few minutes, Yufeng came to his senses, calmed down a little, and thought that he would not be able to go back. A little later, Yufeng cleaned himself up and thought that if he knew that he would not be able to return home, then he would not have let Xiaodo go so easily, and that he would have tried his best to keep her from deciding to file for divorce and disperse. He tore off a photograph from the mirror in which he and Xiaodo were happy with each other, and nothing could interfere with their happiness. He also thought that if Zhang Zhiwei could contact Shen Zirong, then through Shen Zirong he would be able to contact Xiaodo, and then he could try to take steps to win her back and be happy with her again. At that moment, Yufeng's younger sisters and younger brother came to Yufeng's house. Then Yufeng invited them to go to him and have lunch together. Instead of entering, Yuna said that they would like Yufeng to come to their house for lunch today, and Yufeng gladly accepts the invitation from the sisters. After dinner, Yufeng and her sisters and brother decide to take a short walk outside. During the walk, Zheng asked Yufeng when he could stay at their house. Yuna then told Yufeng that, in addition to Huang, some of his relatives had also been arrested recently. Yufeng was only too happy about this outcome, hoping that Huang would receive a death sentence. Yuyue and Zheng were supportive as they also wanted Huang to get what he deserved as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Man Man and Liang Liang, one of Xiao Shan's friends, tried to ask Suyu for help. Man Man began to beg Suyu and Dahai to help them talk Yufeng off, but Suyu did not quite understand what exactly was happening. Then Dahai came out of the house, and they began to explain to him and Zhiwei what the matter was. Liang Liang reminded Dahai of the recent arrest of Huang and his son, and he said that Yufeng was one of the people who reported Huang to the police. Dahai said that he and Man Man had nothing to do with this case, and that they had nothing to worry about. Then Liang Liang told Dahai that he and Yufeng had a fight the other day, and he was afraid that out of resentment, Yufeng might also report them to the police. Dahai thinks that Yufeng is unlikely to report them to the police, and he decides to ask him about it. At this moment, Yuyue was cleaning up the house of the sisters, Yuna was doing her homework, Zheng was playing with toys, and Yufeng was preparing dinner for everyone. After a few minutes, there were a lot of plates with different food. Everyone immediately found themselves at the dinner table and happily ate whatever Yufeng had prepared. A few seconds after everyone sat down at the table, someone started knocking on the door. When Yufeng, still eating, decided to open the door behind which Dahai was standing. Also in the place with Dahai, Suyu, Man Man and Liang Liang came to him. At first, Yufeng was surprised by their presence, and he thought that they wanted to play some kind of MOBA with him, forgetting that in 1983 no one even had a computer. Yufeng nevertheless let the guests in and asked his younger brother to bring some more plates and forks. Liang Liang said that they had recently eaten and that there was no need to lay out the dishes for them. A little later, Liang Liang said that they had all come here to discuss with Yufeng some misunderstanding that had arisen between them. Yufeng did not understand what kind of misunderstanding Liang Liang was talking about. Then Dahai decides to directly ask Yufeng if he informed the police about Man Man and Liang Liang. Yufeng jokingly replied that he had not yet reported them to the police, but he was just about to do so right after lunch. Man Man and Liang Liang were very frightened by what they heard, and Dahai told Yufeng that they had nothing to do with the affair with Huan. Then Yufeng said that they themselves could not possibly be involved in this case. Then Man Man and Liang Liang were very happy that Yufeng would not report them to the police. Then Dahai decided to finally appease Yufeng and told him that he had always considered him the kindest and most just person in the world. After lunch, Yuna sat down to study for her exam while Yufeng helped her with her preparation. During the process of solving one of the subjects, Yufeng noticed that Yuna solves the example incorrectly, and he decides to show her how the given example is solved. Yuna looked at Yufeng's solution and was surprised at how easily he solved the example that she had been unable to solve. In the evening, Yuna asked Yufeng if he would stay overnight, and Yufeng said that he was willing to stay to help her study for her exams. At first, Yufeng planned to start his business in Zhihai, where Xiaodo now resided, but then he thought that he should help Yuna with her exams, and his business idea could wait. Yuna interrupted Yufeng's thoughts to tell him that she had heated water for him so he could wash his feet. A few minutes later, Yufeng went to wash his feet in hot water, which he enjoyed immensely. For several days, Yufeng helped his sisters with chores in every possible way, and he also helped Yuna prepare for the upcoming exams. The day of the exams arrived, and dozens of students were heading to the exam sites that day. Yuna went to the exam and told Yufeng to go back home. Before leaving, Yufeng very loudly wished Yuna good luck in the exams, which made Yuna very frightened, as at that moment everyone around them suddenly turned their attention to them. Yufeng was glad that Yuna finally went to take her exams, and at the same time, he thought that he should start packing before moving to Zhihai. On the way home, Yufeng remembered that he still had meat left at home, and he decided to buy some food for dinner. At the bazaar, Yufeng saw a couple of men selling vegetables, and he decided to buy some vegetables. While Yufeng was picking vegetables, he overheard the two men discussing the arrest of Huang and his son. Yufeng also accidentally overheard that among all the money, Huang did not spend a single yuan, which could only mean that he was saving this money. After that, Yufeng realized that in Linshui he would not be able to spend the 100,000 yuan that he dug up with Huang quickly and without third-party suspicions. Yufeng also realized that if the police did not find the missing money, they would start an even larger investigation, during which Huang could turn in Yufeng. After that, he rushed to the sister's house and demanded that Yuyue bring him all the money he had given them. Yufeng then explained that he didn't think of everything in his plan and that the money needed to be returned as soon as possible, but he said that despite this, he could continue to provide for them. Yuyue gave Yufeng all the money he had given them, and in the evening of the same day he went to the same cemetery where Huang dug up all that money. A little later, Yufeng found the very place where the money was buried, and he realized that the police had not yet been looking for anything here, which greatly reassured Yufeng, after which he buried the money back. Meanwhile, Huang was behind bars at the police station, waiting for the final decision of the authorities. A little later, the director of the plant came to the station, who learned from an officer that 100,000 yuan was missing from the money found, and Huang claims that Yufeng stole this money. The director, however, did not believe that Yufeng could have stolen the money, as he had been very helpful in the investigation, and that he would not have been supplied. The officer said that all of Huang's testimony was true, and that Yufeng had indeed been with Huang at the time. Also said that Yufeng was too suspicious in this case and that they needed to interrogate him. Hearing this, the plant manager abruptly grabbed the officer's hand and demanded that he let him meet with Yufeng in person. Instead of letting the factory manager meet with Yufeng, the officer only said that if he didn't know the factory manager personally, then he would have suspected him. After that, the officer no longer listened to the director of the plant, and the director began to worry that they would not arrest Yufeng. That night, Yufeng just ate ice cream outside and watched two locals play xiangqi with each other. During the game, Yufeng noticed two policemen running towards him to take him to the station. Yufeng, on the other hand, was not at all afraid and did not offer any resistance to the police. After some time, the officer was already interrogating Yufeng about the missing 100,000 yuan, to which Yufeng pretended that he did not know about any money. The officer understood that Yufeng was faking, and he told Yufeng that he had taken the missing money from Huang by force of blackmail. Instead of answering, Yufeng decided to ask the officer what Huang had told them about it. The officer only yelled at Yufeng and told him that only he could ask questions in this room, while Yufeng should give clear answers to those questions. Yufeng said that he did not take any money, and the officer asked Yufeng why he took Huang to him, to which Yufeng said that he wanted to see the evidence. The officer then asked if Yufeng Huang had threatened to denounce the police and forced him to give him 100,000 yuan. In response, Yufeng replied that he did not have any money and could not have it. The officer added that at that time, Huang did not know that he was wanted, and he wanted to ask Yufeng why he decided to go with him that day. Yufeng said that it was Huang who caused his parents to die at the factory. Yufeng personally wanted to watch the police arrest Huang on the spot. A second later, Yufeng stood up from his chair and demanded that Huang be sentenced to life imprisonment. The officer was very frightened by Yufeng's heightened emotionality and asked him to calm down and sit back on the chair. The officer then told Yufeng that, according to Huang, he dug up 100,000 yuan and gave it to Yufeng, to which Yufeng asked that Huang had brought them to dig into his ancestors. Yufeng then drew the officer's attention to the fact that when Huang said that he was digging out the money, his clothes were completely clean. Yufeng also added that Huan may have saved the money for his son. After such conclusions, the officer thought for a while and left the interrogation room. After that, the officer handed over to one of the policemen the order to check Huang's testimony to find out exactly where he went with Yufeng and check those places. At that moment, another policeman ran to the station with the news that the missing 100,000 yuan had been found. This policeman reported that they found exactly 100,000 yuan where Huan said. After that, the plant manager wanted to thank the officer by offering him a cigarette, but the officer refused such gratitude. The director then asked the officer if they would let Yufeng go, to which the officer replied that he was already free. That night, the factory manager walks down the street with Yufeng and invites him to eat together at one of the restaurants as a token of his gratitude. Yufeng said that his family is now very worried about him, and that the idea of a restaurant should be put aside. Then Yufeng decides to seize the moment and ask the director for compensation. The director said that he had already sent the letter to the right people, and that the answer would come in the next couple of days. After that, Yufeng tried to pressure the director into pity, telling him that he was unemployed, and therefore he was now short of money. The director then said that he would send another letter, and that he would send Yufeng a reply within a week. The director also added that after Xiao Shan's arrest, one vacancy appeared at the plant. Then Yufeng thought to himself how much he could earn at the factory, and that it would be better for him to move to Zhihai as soon as possible. Then Yufeng tells the director that he is forced to refuse his offer to get a job at the factory instead of Xiao Shan. After that, Yufeng goes home, while the director did not understand how a person without money and work can refuse to work. The next day, Tsuyu wanted to play jump rope with the local children. Just at that moment, Yufeng walked past them, who was surprised by what Tsuyu was doing in his spare time. Yufeng greeted Tsuyu, and Tsuyu was greatly frightened that Yufeng saw her in such a childish form. Yufeng wanted to ask Tsuyu if he could use her phone again. When Yufeng enters Tsuyu's house, he decides to ask her if she knows Xiaodo's number. Then Ziyu remembered her recent conversation with Man Man, in which she ordered Ziyu not to give Xiaodo's number to Yufeng. Then Tsuyu had no choice but to tell Yufeng that she did not know the number. Yufeng then asked Tsuyu to dial Shen Zishan's number for him. Tsuyu said that she wouldn't give him Xiaodo's number either, from which Yufeng realized that Tsuyu was just lying.